Hi everyone, thanks for joining me here on JKD Handmade. For this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to make these raglan sweaters. Now the one that you see in front of you, this is for a 3-month baby. So this pattern is from a 3-month baby to an adult 5XL, and it's both for male and female. It's a basic pattern, and I'd like to think that it's an easy pattern. I'd say if you have crocheted a scarf before, you would definitely be able to make something like this. I've tried to go in depth with this pattern so that it's accessible to everyone, both beginners and advanced crocheters out there. So yes, the thing that I like about this pattern is that you're not restricted to one type of yarn or one brand of yarn or one weight of yarn. You can use any of the 3 weights that I explain in the material section. And you're not, as I said, you're not restricted to the brand of yarn that I use. So let's just see. Here I've made one for a 3-month baby, and the stitch that I used here was the basic double crochet. So here it is. You'll see I do give you an option to use any of the 2 stitches. You can only use one type of stitch. It's either a double crochet or, like I've used in this one, the herringbone double crochet, and I seem to have fallen in love with the stitch. I have made these sweaters, I think it was about 3 years ago, and here I'm wearing one of them, and you can see that it's really worn out. So yes, it is time for an upgrade on these sweaters, and at the same time I thought I'd share a pattern with you guys as well. So like I was saying with the stitches, I've given you 2 stitches, either the double crochet or the herringbone, any one of them throughout the pattern. For this tutorial, I'll be making this sweater that you see here. This is a size small. Even though I'm making a size small, you will follow along with the size that you are making. So I will provide all your measurements, and it's just standard measurements for the different sizes from a 3-month baby to an adult 5XL, both male and female. So you'll follow along and you'll use the measurements for the size that you are working. Those measurements will all be provided as we get into the tutorial. But this one I used a 4-ply weight, and this little sweater here I used also, it was a 4-ply weight. I'll explain more about these weights in just a little bit into the tutorial. That was a 4-ply, this was a 4-ply, and then here I used a category 4, which is a worsted weight, so it's thicker than the 4-ply. And my stitch here was the herringbone double crochet. For this one, this is actually a sweater dress. Here I used a worsted weight as well, and I used the herringbone double crochet. So I just turned this raglan sweater into a sweater dress just by increasing on the length. You can make it cropped, you can change the length however you wish to change it from a sweater to a sweater dress, as I've done here. So there's quite a few options with this pattern. And then here, this was for my husband. I made this, and here I used a DK weight yarn, and I also used the herringbone double crochet. And on this one, this is an oversized sweater. And to get it oversized, what I actually did was, as you get into the tutorial, you'll see I'll give you measurements. Even though this was made for a size medium, I went ahead and used the armhole depth measurement for a size large to give it that oversized sweater look. There are so many ways to adjust the pattern to get the fit of the sweater that you're looking for, and I will show you how to in this pattern. Okay, so for those of you that are new to my channel, I share any pattern, whatever I feel like making. Crochet patterns, both easy, beginner friendly, and intermediate. These are just patterns that I make for myself, my family, and friends, and I choose to share it with you. So yeah, if you haven't already subscribed, please do consider subscribing. And for those of you that have subscribed, thank you so much. And this is for you. Hope you enjoy. Let's get on with this tutorial. Let's talk about the yarns that we could use for this pattern. So any of these 3 weights would be fine. And this is 100% acrylic yarns that I'm using. So here I have a category 2, which is a 4-ply or a sport weight. Then I have a double knit, which is a category 3 or a light worsted yarn. And then I have a worsted weight, which is a category 4 or an Aran weight. You may use any of these 3 weights, provided that you stick to 1 weight for the entire pattern. You will not work this pattern with, let's say, a double knit for half the pattern and then an Aran for the rest. Keep to 1 weight for the entire pattern, and it can be any of these 3 weights. Now, when you look at these weights of yarn, the 4-ply is the thinnest of the 3, and then you have your double knit, which is the most common, and it's in between the 2, and then you have your worsted weight, which would be the thickest of the 3. And this is just going by what I see on the label. Okay, so for the yarn labels, I will work with these labels. Like, from what I know, 4-ply yarn, the recommended hook on these yarns is generally from a 2,5 to a 3,5 millimeter hook. And then for the pattern itself, I will stick to the recommended hook size on the label for all my ribbings. That's for the ribbing at the neck, the ribbings at the sleeves, and the ribbing at the bottom of the sweater. So it's the recommended hook for the ribbings, and then I'll go 1 size bigger on that hook for the rest of the sweater. So if I look at my 4-ply, I'll use a 3 millimeter hook for my ribbings, and I'll use a 4 millimeter hook for the rest of the sweater. And then for my double knit, the recommended hook for a double knit is a 4 millimeter hook. So for my ribbings, I'll be using a 4 millimeter hook for all those ribbings, and then I'll work with a 5 millimeter hook for the rest of the sweater. And then for my worsted weight, the recommended hook for these weights are generally 5 to 5,5 millimeter hooks. So for my ribbing, I'll use a 5 millimeter hook, and for the rest of the sweater, I'll use a 6 millimeter hook. So that's just a general idea of the hook sizes that you could use. It's the recommended hook on the labels for your ribbings and 1 size bigger for the rest of the sweater. Remember, these are all acrylic yarns, and it's just that you get to choose what weight you prefer using. The brand is not important. You are going to get the same finish as I got working with different brands. It's just you choose your brand and your weight of yarn that you prefer working with. When it comes to the quantities of yarn needed for this project, I can only give you estimates based on the quantities that I actually used for my projects. Take, for example, the sweater here. This is for a 3-month baby. Here I used a 4-ply weight. I used 100 grams to complete the sweater. And then here for this sweater, which is for a woman's size small, I used a 4-ply weight, which is a category 2. Here I used 200 grams to complete the sweater. For this sweater, which is for a woman size medium, here I used a worsted weight, which is a category 4. I used 500 grams to complete the sweater. This is a sweater dress for this size, which is a woman's size medium. And here I used a category 4, which is a worsted weight. For this project, I used 650 grams. This sweater is for men and it's a size large. I used a DK weight, which is a category 3, and to complete this, I used 600 grams. And then I have this oversized sweater, which is for women in a size medium. Here I used a worsted weight, which is a category 4. To complete this, I used 600 grams. So these are just a rough idea of the quantities. I'm hoping that it could give you an idea of how much yarn you would need to complete your project. I mean, if you are wanting to make it a size bigger than the ones that I have or smaller, then you would obviously need more or less yarn, all depending on that size. Okay, so for this pattern, I will be using a 4-ply yarn. So this is it. This is 100% acrylic. There was not really a label on this. It just came with the packaging, and here it is. I've already made one sweater out of this, and I'm planning on making my next one out of it for this tutorial. So here's the label. It's a 4-ply, it's 100% acrylic, and this entire skein was 500 grams. Now it doesn't say anything about the hook size and things like that, but from what I know, as I told you, I'll be using a 3mm hook for my ribbings, and I'll use a 4mm hook for the rest of the sweater. You'll also need stitch markers for separating the yoke, and then you'll need a pair of scissors, a yarn or wool needle, and you'll also need a measuring tape to help with your measurements. Remember, we're working the sweater according to body measurements, so you will use the measurements for the size that you are working on, and the measurements that I provide are all standard measurements. You could, if you know how to take measurements, you could go out and physically measure should you wish to, but I do provide these standard measurements, and you will find them in the pattern as we go along. Okay, so let's get on with this tutorial. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to show you may seem slightly strange or weird, but it's the only way I get to show you exactly what I mean here. So when we're working this pattern, the first thing we'll do is form a ribbing. Now this ribbing needs to fit around the circumference of the head. So here I have a little doll that's going to be my model, and I've worked ribbings in those 3 weights that I've just spoken about. Here it is. So this is my 4-ply, and here's a little ribbing. When you work your ribbing, you will make certain that it fits around the head. So without stretching, this is without stretching, so do not pull on it, just as it is, fit it around the head to get the head circumference, and both ends must touch on either side, and then you know that it will fit. Okay, so this was with a 4-ply, and for this ribbing I worked 64 rounds, but you'll see that it does change with different weights of yarn. So here I have my double knit, and here it fits around the head without stretching. So for my double knit, I worked 50 rounds on my ribbing. So you can already see that it's less rounds on my double knit. And then for my worsted weight, here it is, and it fits around. Here I worked 48 rounds for this ribbing to fit around this head circumference. So it all depends on the weight of yarn that you're working with. Your ribbing will change according to the weight of yarn that you are using. I've got a complete list on the different ribbing rounds, number of rounds that you work. And for this pattern, I follow that list to separate the yoke. So that's the first thing that we'll do. We'll work a ribbing that can fit around the head. So you'll work your ribbing and make certain that it fits around the head of the person that you are making it for. Moving on to our tutorial. Here goes. Form a slip knot. Here we're working the ribbing. Then using your recommended hook, chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You may work more chains. That would give you a wider ribbing. Round 1 into the second chain from the hook, single crochet. So here's my first chain and that's my second one. Insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook. Continue with single crochets into the remaining 3 chains. Now you have 4 stitches. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Make certain that your stitch count is always the same for your ribbing as you continue on. Round 2, chain 1 and turn. Now we're working into the back loops. So the loop that's closest to you is the front loop and the one on the other side is your back loop. We'll be working all our stitches into the back loops here on out for the rest of the ribbing. Into that second stitch from the hook, work a single crochet into the back loop. Continue with single crochets into the back loops only, into the remaining 3 stitches. Again, you have 4 stitches. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then round 3, chain 1 and turn. Here we're working single crochets into the back loops only. That's 2, 3, and 4. So for the rest of the ribbing, you'll continue on with chain 1, turn, single crochets into the back loops only. I've continued on with my ribbing. Here it is. So once you've got your length of ribbing, you can go ahead and measure this length of ribbing against the physical head circumference of the person that you are making this for. So you'll fit this around the head and it must fit unstretched. Do not stretch out when you're measuring, just as it is around the person's head. When these 2 ends join, then you know that your ribbing is of the right length. So the next step to get our ribbing right, we need to go and count the number of rounds of ribbing that we've worked. So we'll count the number of rounds and then we need to fit it into sort of a chart for the different sizes. And here I've prepared a chart. I've already calculated all the separations for the yoke. The separations are your front body, back body, and your sleeves on either side. Now, to be honest, here's my chart. This is what I keep at my bedside drawer, and this is my go-to, and it has all my measurements that I've calculated. So I've made a better version for you. Here it is. So we're working with the head circumference measurements, and this is the ribbing and stitch count chart. So you'll see a list of numbers here. The first, the one in bold right at the top, is the number of ribbing rounds worked, and then below it you have a set of 4 numbers, and those are the stitches that we will place stitch markers into. Okay, so we will get back to this chart in a moment. Let's go ahead and count the number of rounds that we've worked. Now, if you look at your ribbing here, you will see on either side, you've got little ridges that have formed. This is it. And then you have the sunken area that's formed. So here's it, the ridge, the sunken area, the ridge, and that lowered point, the ridge, and here it goes down. Here it's high up, and then it's down. So in between there, you have your rounds. So if you look at this raised area, and just to the side of it, that's 1. And then here's a raised area, and on either side there's 1 and there's 2. So you'll go ahead and count your rounds. Now let me count this with you. So here goes. So that's 1, and then here's 2. So I know that my second round is going to be, here's 1, and then there's 2 right before that ridge there. So 1, 1, and 2. So let me count it. That's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Then I go again, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. That's 40, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. Then that's 60, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. And here I have 2 more. So that's 80. So I just count it in multiples. It makes it easier for me. Do it however you choose to. I've got 80 rounds that I've worked here. So for these 80 rounds, I've got to go back to my chart and look to see that I have it anywhere here. So here I'm in luck. Here's 80 here. So I can use these stitches here to work my yoke. So you will need to adjust your ribbing to the number of rounds. Like if, let's say I had 78, I could work 2 more rounds to bring it to 80, or I could remove 2 rounds to bring it to 76. I always choose to increase on the number of rounds. So in my opinion, rather increase the number of rounds of ribbing to bring it to whatever you can get, whichever number you can get it to on this chart. So like I said, I have 80 rounds of ribbing. So these are the sets of stitches that I'll be working with. Now continuing on from where we had stopped on our ribbing, we need to join these 2 ends. Once we have our rounds of ribbing right to fit the chart, either by increasing the number of rounds that you've worked, you can go ahead and chain 1, and then you'll bring the start of that ribbing together with the end, And here we're joining the two ends by slip stitching. So into this one side of your ribbing, go into the stitch there, and on the opposite side, go in there. And then it's yarn over and pull through all those loops on your hook. And then for your next stitch, that was 2, 3, and 4. So here we've joined the ends of our ribbing to form a ring. You may turn the side on the inside, that will become the wrong side. Now we'll change our hook to the bigger of the two hooks. I'm going for a 4mm hook. Then it's chain 1. Now here we're looking to work single crochets all across, and we're looking to work those single crochets that are the same stitch count as the number of rounds of ribbing. So I know that from my chart, I've worked 80 rounds of ribbing. So I'll go ahead and work 80 single crochets all the way around. Should you have worked, let's say, 68 rounds of ribbing, you'll work 68 stitches, single crochets, and so on. So you'll follow your stitch count will be the same as the rounds of ribbing that you've worked. So I've chained 1, and then into that same stitch from where I've chained 1, I'll work my first single crochet. And then I'm working single crochets all around, and I'll work them into these little gaps as I move on. So here I'll work 1 into this little gap here, and then right at the top above that raised area, I'll work my next one there, and then I've got 1 into this gap, the next one into that raised area right at the top. So you continue on with single crochets, making certain that the number of stitches you work is the same as the rounds of ribbing that you've worked. I've continued on working those single crochets, and at this point you need to make certain that the number of stitches that you've worked is the same as what you're working from your chart. Like for me, I'm working with 80, so I should have, or I must have, 80 single crochets. I've counted my stitches and I do have 80 stitches. And then into that first single crochet, slip stitch to join. So that was round 1 of the yoke. Now here we need to separate this neckline to form the yoke. So we're going to separate it into 4 parts: the back, the front, and the sleeves on either side. And for our back, we'll separate our back again into 2, because here's our starting point. So it'll be back, sleeve, front, sleeve, and then back here again. Okay, so to do that, you need your 4 stitch markers. And then you look at the chart again, and here I'm working on 80. So my first stitch that I'll mark into is going to be my 12th stitch. So if I count, and I'll count my start as the first stitch, so that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. Place a stitch marker into that stitch. And then it's my 28th stitch. So this was the 12th stitch. Then 14, 16, 18, 20, 2, 4, 6, 8. So here it is, 28. Place a stitch marker. And then it's my 52nd stitch. So I know that's 28, then it's 30, 2, 4, 6, 8, then 40, 2, 4, 6, 8, 50, and 2 52nd stitch. And then it's my 68th stitch. So that's 52, 54, 56, 58, 60, 2, 4, 6, 8, 68th stitch. Here it is. So if I continue on, if that's 68, then 70, 2, 4, 6, 8, and that will give me 80. So it brings me to my full stitch count here. I've got my 4 separations. This is my back body, that's my sleeve, my front body, and my sleeve on the opposite side. Continuing on with round 2 of the yoke. So from round 2 onwards, you will always turn after every round, and that ensures that this seam that runs along the back will remain straight and doesn't go askew. The moment you stop turning, it goes askew. So it's chain 2. Now let me just stop here by saying that you may use different stitches for this pattern. I'll show you how to use work this pattern using a double crochet, but however, I seem to have fallen in love with the herringbone double crochet, so that too I will show you. I've made many of my sweaters using the herringbone double crochet. For any crocheters out there who know more about stitches and such, if there's any stitch that is of the same length as a double crochet, you may go ahead and use that stitch as well, just as long as it's the same length as double crochet. So let me show you the 2 stitches that you can use. First, it's a double crochet. It's yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook. That's a double crochet. You may use that stitch. Or for this pattern, I will be using the herringbone double crochet. So to work the stitch, it's yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, pull up a loop, go through the first loop on your hook, yarn over, go through 1 loop on your hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook. So again, it's yarn over, insert your hook into that next stitch, pull the first stitch through the second, yarn over, through 1 loop on your hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook. So you continue on with your stitches until you get to that first stitch marker. I've worked my way to stitch marker 1. Here it is. Stitch marker 1, it marks off corner 1. So into that stitch, we'll work a herringbone double crochet, chain 1, and 1 more herringbone double crochet, all into that same stitch. So here it is. We've actually worked a V stitch. So it's a stitch, chain 1, stitch, all into the 1 stitch. and then you can place your stitch marker into that chain 1 space, and that's corner 1. So then you'll continue on with your herringbone double crochet to corner 2, which is your stitch marker 2. Here I am at stitch marker 2, so this is corner 2. Into that stitch, I'll work a herringbone double crochet, chain 1, and a herringbone double crochet. And here's it. And then I'll replace my stitch marker into that chain 1 space. Continue on working your stitches all along here, and then into the next corner you'll work a herringbone double crochet, chain 1, herringbone double crochet, replacing your stitch marker into the chain 1 space. Then it's your herringbone double crochet to your 4th corner. You'll work a herringbone double crochet, chain 1, herringbone double crochet, replacing your stitch marker into that chain 1 space, and then you'll work your stitches to the end of the round. I've continued on with this round 2 of my yoke, and here I am at the end of that round. So to end the round, you can slip stitch into that 2nd chain from chain 2 to join. Okay, so now we know that these 4 stitch markers, apart from marking off the separation of our yoke, they represent 4 corners, and into those 4 corners we'll always work an increase. Our increase is the stitch, chain 1 stitch, all into that same chain space that we have marked off. So we continue on with round 3. It's chain 2 and turn. Work your stitches, whatever it may be, herringbone double crochet or double crochets, to your 1st corner. Here I am at that 1st corner, so it's the chain 1 space. You'll remove your stitch marker, and you'll see that I've worked my last stitch into that stitch that makes up the V stitch here. Then into my chain 1 space, I'll work a stitch, chain 1, and another stitch into that chain 1 space. Replace your stitch marker into the chain 1 space, and then you'll continue on with your stitches into all these stitches from the previous round. So I'm working the herringbone double crochet until the next corner. Here I am at my 2nd corner. Remove the stitch marker, work a herringbone double crochet, chain 1, herringbone double crochet, all into that same chain 1 space. So for every round, we're repeatedly working a V stitch into the chain 1 spaces at the corners. And then you'll continue on with your stitches until you get to the next corner where it's a V-stitch here, which is a herringbone double crochet, chain 1 herringbone double crochet, or a double crochet, chain 1 double crochet, whichever you choose to work with. And then it's your stitches again, a V-stitch here at your last corner. Then it's your stitches, and you can slip stitch to join. So we're continuously repeating this round for the remainder of our yoke, and this causes the yoke to grow and eventually fit over the shoulders. I've continued on, and this is what my yoke looks like. All I've done was repeat round 2 until my yoke. Now here's that starting point, and if I fold my yoke in half along the sleeves, so let me just explain that. Here's the back from the start on either side of start and end. Here's the back. Then it's the sleeves on these sides, and here's the front. So if I fold my yoke in half at the sleeve, and with the start and end running straight down the back here, I can go ahead and measure the armhole depth for the size that I am making. In the clip to follow, you'll see that I've got all the armhole depths for the different sizes from a 3-month-old baby to an adult 5XL. It's all listed there, and you'll see that because I'm working a size small, the armhole depth for a size small is 6.5 to 7 inches. So if I look at it here, that's 6.5 or 16.5 centimeters, or 7 inches or 17.5 centimeters. So if I go ahead and measure along my sleeve edge here, remember this is folded in half. From there, it just measures around 6.5 inches. So you need to work your yoke until when it's folded in half, as I have it here, it must measure the armhole depth for the size that you are making. Now here's the measurements. You may pause to jot down these measurements, or you may screenshot them. Okay, so once you have your armhole depth measured, we've completed the yoke. We'll now move on to the body of this sweater. So we're just continuing on from where we had stopped. And you'll also see that by turning after every round, here's my seam, and the seam remains straight. Okay, so for round 1 of the body, again we're continuing with our same stitch all the way to the first corner. So it's chain 2, 1, 2, turn, work your stitches to that first corner, here I've worked my way to that first corner. Into that corner, I'll work my stitch. So at this point, we need to join from one stitch marker to the next, and what we're leaving out here will form our armhole spaces. So it's this portion that makes up the sleeve. Now, this chain that I'm about to chain is optional. You may entirely leave it out, or you can chain as many chains as you'd like, keeping in mind that the longer the chain, the looser the fit on the sleeve and on the body. So I always find that I'm chaining 3. I'll chain 3, 1, 2, 3. I find that chain 3s work for me. Like I said, the longer this chain, the looser the fit. Now, you may feel that if you want a more fitted sweater, at those times, I'll go ahead and completely leave out this chain. I'll work my stitch into that chain 2, and then I'll go directly into my next stitch marker on the other side and join. But like I've done here, I've chained 3 and then skipping the stitches in between the 2 stitch markers, join to that next chain space marked off by your second stitch marker. So I've worked a herringbone double crochet into my chain 2 space, then it was a chain 3, and I've worked a herringbone double crochet into that chain 2 space on the opposite side. So this that we've skipped, this becomes the armhole space on the one side. Now we'll work all along the front, this portion here, to get to our 3rd stitch marker right here. So you're working your stitches all along this front, and you're working them into all your stitches from the previous round. Here I am at my 3rd stitch marker. So into that chain 2 space, work your stitch. So for this sleeve, your second armhole space, you need to do exactly what you've done on your first armhole space. For me, I had chain 3. I'll go ahead and chain 3, 1, 2, 3. And then skipping the stitches in between your 3rd and 4th stitch marker, you'll join to your 4th stitch marker. So into that chain 2 space, work your stitch. So this is your second armhole space. And then you'll continue on with your stitches to complete this round. I've completed round 1 of the body. I slip stitched to join here. So now we're working along this portion of our sweater. So it's just the body. So we're going around here. We'll work our way to this chain. We'll work stitches into this chain and stitches into the chain on the opposite side. And then we'll continue to work down the body to whatever length you'd like your sweater at. Should it be cropped to the waist or to the hip, upper hip, below the hip, to the knee, you can turn it into a sweater dress, however you wish to make your sweater. Now for round 2 of the body, it's just chain 2, turn, double crochets, or the herringbone double crochet all the way around, and here you work your way to the end and slip stitch to join. So you're working your stitches into these chains as well. I've worked my way to this chain joining the front and back body. So this chain actually marks the underarm of the sweater, of the sleeve. So that's the underarm. Now into that chain, I'll continue on working my stitches. And I know that I've chained 3, so I've got to work 3 stitches here. And then I'll continue on with my stitches until I get to the next armhole space, and I'll do the same with the chain there. I've continued on with round 2 of the body, so I've worked my stitches into the underarm as well on the other side. Here it is, the one side, and here's the other. And then I worked my way to the end and I slip stitched to join. Now we're just working our sweater. We'll work it all the way down to complete the body, and then we'll work a little ribbing at the end. So I've continued on with the body, and all I've done was repeat round 2 of the body, working my stitches all the way around and then slip stitching to join. So I continued on repeating that round until I got to the length that I'm looking for my sweater. Now you can go ahead and make it a cropped sweater that's above the waist, and then one to the waist, or one just to the upper hip, the lower hip, below the hip, or even turn it into a sweater dress by going longer. So it's all really up to you, the length of your sweater. That's just by repeating the round 2 of the body. So continuing on now, I'm here at this point where I need to work the ribbing at the bottom of the sweater. So using the smaller of my 2 hooks, continuing from where I've stopped, it's chain 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now I generally use a chain of 11 for adults. If I'm looking to make this for children sizes, I will use a chain of 9. So this chain is also adjustable. You can make it as long or as short as you'd like to, depending on the width of ribbing that you're looking for. So once you've chained your chain, into that second chain from the hook, single crochet. So here's our first chain, and there's the second one. Into that chain, insert your hook, pull up a loop. You have 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, go through both loops on the hook. Continue on with single crochets into the remaining chains. Now, depending on how many chains you've chained, you must have 1 stitch less than the number of chains. Like in my case, I chained 11, so I must have 10 stitches. So that's, let's count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, so for the ribbing, it's important to make certain that your stitch count remains the same as you continue on with the ribbing. Now we need to attach this portion off the ribbing to this bottom edge of your sweater. So to do that, you need to slip stitch. So right here into that next stitch, here's my first stitch, and you'll see if I bring my ribbing down into that next stitch here, that's where I'll slip stitch. So that's insert your hook into that stitch, pull up a loop, take that same loop and pull it through the one on your hook. And then you'll work another slip stitch into the next stitch. So you've worked 2 slip stitches. Then for round 2, it's turn. Now you'll always skip those slip stitches. So it's 1, 2, you'll skip those 2, and into that next stitch, you'll work your first stitch. So you'll insert your hook into that stitch. Here we're working into the back loops only. So if you look at your stitch, you have 2 loops on your stitch. Here's the front loop, and that's the loop that is facing you, that's closest to you. And you have your back loop, that's the one that's away from you. So we'll be working all our stitches into these back loops for our ribbing. So skipping those slip stitches, 1, 2, and into the next stitch, I'll work my first stitch into the back loop. So it's a single crochet into the back loop. Then I'll continue on with single crochets into the back loops only for the rest of this round. Again, make certain that your stitch count has remained the same. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. Then for round 3, it's chain 1 and turn. Chain 1 counts as our turning chain. Into the next stitch, we'll work our first stitch. And again, it's into those back loops. Work single crochets into the back loops only. Count your stitches, that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, that's correct. So then now here again, I need to join my ribbing to this bottom edge of my sweater. So you've got to be careful here not to get into that stitch here, right here, the one that's directly under your ribbing, because most of the time your slip stitches are worked into that stitch and it's pulled forward, but it really looks like it's a stitch that's left unworked. So I always take my ribbing, pull it forward, and I know that the stitch that sits directly under that ribbing is the stitch that I will not work my first slip stitch into. So into that next stitch there, I'll work a slip stitch. Oops, I've got to tighten up here. Okay, so into that next stitch, I'll work a slip stitch and then another slip stitch into the next stitch. And then I can continue on repeating round 2 and round 3 until I've worked my way all around this bottom edge. Now, before I move on, let me explain different ways to tighten up on this ribbing. So sometimes you may find that you want to go tighter on your ribbing because this bottom edge is just too wide, or sometimes I most often do it on my sleeves where I just want to tighten up on that sleeve even more. So what I would do is, instead of working 2 slip stitches, I'll work 3 slip stitches, so that I'll work 1 extra slip stitch, and then when I turn, I need to skip those 3 slip stitches. Always skip your slip stitches, and then you'll continue on with your ribbing into the stitches from your ribbing itself and not those off that were your slip stitches. So that's what I do when I want to tighten up even further on my ribbings. Like for this sweater itself, I'm just going to go ahead and work my 2 slip stitches right through as I get to the bottom edges. But I have done this on my sleeve edges where I've tightened up really on those ribbings. And most of the time I would work like 2 slip stitches, and then when I get to my next round, I'll work 3 slip stitches. When I get to my next round, 2 slip stitches, and then 3 slip stitches. So sometimes I find myself alternating between 2 or 3 slip stitches to join the ribbing to the bottom edge, or I sometimes even just go ahead and work 3 slip stitches all the way around when I'm joining my ribbing to my bottom edge. So that's, by working those 3 slip stitches, it tightens up even more on the ribbing. It's sort of like, in other words, you like sort of lose a stitch by working 3 slip stitches instead of 2. So I hope that makes sense, but that just is another way of tightening up even more on your ribbing. So you need to look at your sweater and decide if you want your ribbing, if you want it rather tightened up here, or you want it a similar width for your ribbing. If it's a similar width, you go with 2 slip stitches instead of 3, even though it will tighten up just slightly because of your hook size, because you've dropped a hook size. But it wouldn't tighten up that much. If you want it really tight, then you go with 3 slip stitches. It's all up to you. You will have to decide on that. But that's just how I go about working my ribbings. Like I said, for this ribbing, I'm just going ahead with straight 2 slip stitches all the way around. And once I'm done, you'll see the outcome of that as well. So you'll continue on repeating rounds 2 and 3 to complete this ribbing all around this bottom edge of your sweater. I've worked my way with this ribbing all around this bottom edge of my sweater. So here I am right at the end. Now, once I got to the end, I had 1 stitch remaining. So I worked a slip stitch into that 1 stitch, and then I continued on with my ribbing. Here you'll see, you know when to stop your ribbing once these 2 edges of the ribbing are able to meet without overlapping. Like, you wouldn't want it to overlap at all. So, or on the other hand, you wouldn't want a space in between your ribbing. So once they are able to meet, just as it is here, as you see here, then you can go ahead and slip stitch to join these 2 edges together. Now, there are 2 ways of doing this joining. One is by slip stitching and the other is by seaming across. So I will show you how to seam your ribbing together, but I'll show you that when I get to the sleeves. For now, I'm showing you how to slip stitch your ribbings together. So it's chain 1. Oh yes, one other thing. You may find that you either end on this side or you end on that side. And then should that happen, you would still go ahead and join your ribbing in the same manner by slip stitching. So it's a chain 1. And then you'll bring both sides of these ribbings together. And now here you're working from one side to the next side. So here I'll get into my stitch on the side of the ribbing and go back into that first stitch there. And then I'll pull up a loop and pull it through my stitches. Then I'll take that first loop and bring it through the second loop. Oops. So again, go into the first stitch on the side, into the stitch on the other side, pull it through and go through. get into the stitch on one side, get into the stitch on the other side, pull up a loop, take that same loop and pull it through. So for your ribbing, you're matching it stitch for stitch on either side to join. And then you continue on with your slip stitches until your ribbing is joined up. Now here's the ribbings that are joined. You can fasten off and cut off on that excess yarn. Now as you can see from here, here's my ribbing, and you can see that it has tightened up slightly, and that's because we've dropped our hook to one size smaller. But if, like I said, if you want it even tighter, then you can go with your alternating between 2 slip stitches and 3 slip stitches, or even tighter, you can go with working 3 slip stitches across. So that does it for the body. We'll now continue on to work our sleeve. So right here, if I take my sleeve, and this is the underarm of the sleeve, that's where I'll attach yarn. And then it's chain 2. Chain 2 counts as our first stitch. So here we're working our stitches all the way around the sleeve. I'll remove these stitch markers as I no longer need them. You'll continue with your chosen stitch all around the sleeve. Oh, sorry, all around this armhole space. So I've continued on completing round 1 of the sleeve. Here it is. To end that round, it's into that second chain from our chain 2 slip stitch to join. Round 2, chain 2 and turn. Again, make certain that you turn after every round to avoid the seam or your joining to go askew. So here you need to know how to adjust your sleeve to the fit that you're looking for. You can either have a sleeve that is tapered off or one that is wide. So like here, I've worked a sleeve that is wide. On this one, I've worked a sleeve that is wide. There are no decreases worked on the sleeve. But for this sleeve, I'd actually like to taper off on the sleeve. So to taper off on your sleeves, you need to work decreases. So I'll begin with 1 decrease on this side, and then I'll work my way, those stitches all the way around, and right at the end, I'll end with another decrease. To work a decrease, it's yarn over, insert your hook into that first stitch, pull up a loop, insert your hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop. You've got 4 loops on your hook, yarn over and go through 3 loops on your hook, yarn over and go through 2 loops on your hook. So you've taken 2 stitches and you've turned it into only 1 stitch. That was a decrease. Then you'll continue on with your stitches until you get to your last 2 stitches before joining. I've continued on with round 2, and here I am at my last 2 stitches. So into those 2 stitches, I'll work a decrease, which is yarn over, insert your hook into that first stitch, pull up a loop, insert your hook into the second stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, and then you can slip stitch into that second chain from chain 2 to join. So this is how you would work a decrease round. It's a chain 2, turn, a decrease, your stitches all the way around, and then it's a decrease and then slip stitch to join. So for my next round, round 3, it's chain 2, turn. Here I'm working my stitches all the way around without any decreases. So, and I'll continue on to complete my sleeve in this manner. Now remember, those decreases are only if you want to taper off on your sleeve. If you want a wide fit on your sleeve, you will not work any decreases. So I've continued on, I've worked my sleeve, and in this case, I've tapered off my sleeve by working those decreases after every 3rd round. Well, I actually worked it after every 3rd round to a point when I felt that my sleeve was tapered enough, and then I just continued on the rest of the way without any decreases. When it comes to your sleeve, you can work, you can continue with your sleeve working no decreases until you get to the elbow, and then you can start with your decreases after every 3rd round until you get to the length of your eventual sleeve. That's to taper off the sleeve. Then of course you could work your sleeve where you'd want a wider sleeve, and that would be just working your sleeve in the round with no decreases at all. So you'll know when your sleeve is to the right length. When you measure your sleeve, it must measure the sleeve length. So you'll know when your sleeve is at the right length once your sleeve measuring from the underarm, and that's the part right here, going all the way to the bottom, measures around 2 inches, or that's 2 inches or 5 centimeters less than the sleeve length from the standard measurements that you see in this next clip. Now these are just standard measurements for the different sizes. I always work with them when I'm working a full length on my sleeve. There again, remember, you can always adjust the length. The length is totally up to you. You can make it a short sleeve, a 3/4, or a full length. That's totally up to you. But for those measurements, these measurements in the next clip are just standard measurements for a full length sleeve. And you'll see that I'm working a size small. So the measurement for a size small is 17 inches or 43 centimeters. Now I've just worked my sleeve 2 inches or 5 centimeters less than that measurement because I need to add on a ribbing. And my ribbing measures around 2 inches or 5 centimeters. So that with the ribbing gives me the full length of my sleeve. Okay, so here's the measurements. I've continued on with this ribbing. To be honest, I went ahead and alternated between the 2 slip stitches and the 3 slip stitches, as I felt that I didn't get a tight enough ribbing here. So like I said, you can work 2 slip stitches throughout to join your ribbing to the sleeve, or you can alternate between 2 slip stitches and 3 slip stitches, or you can work 3 slip stitches throughout. It all depends on the tightness of the ribbing that you're looking for. So I think this does it for me. It's actually for a much smaller size, and that's about the right fit on my ribbing. Okay, so I've already shown you how to join your ribbing by slip stitching. So for this sleeve, I'll show you how to join this ribbing by stitching your ribbing together. Okay, so once you've worked your way to the end, now in my case I had 1 stitch remaining, so I slip stitched into just that 1 stitch, and then I skipped the 1 slip stitch and I continued on with my ribbing, and here I am at the end here. Now I know that my ribbing is complete because when I bring these 2 edges together, they meet at this point without overlapping or anything of that sort. So they just meet. Okay, here's my edges. Now to join, you can fasten off, leaving behind a long enough tail end. This is for those of you who don't prefer the slip stitches. You can go ahead and seam, but for those of you who are fine with slip stitching, that's the way you would join. You need your yarn needle, so here you bring those 2 edges together. And here all we're doing is going back and forth into our stitches on either side. So right there and here. There aren't like really stitches on the side. You'll just pick up on these loops that you can see on that side. And that is about it. When I first learned to crochet, I struggled with slip stitching. So this is what I would always do. But you do get used to the slip stitching. I mean, if you do it as many times, eventually you do get used to it. But this is just another option. So here it is. It's all seamed together. And this tail end, I'll take it to the wrong side, and later on I'll seam in all these tail ends. So you'll work your next sleeve in exactly the same way as you have done for your first sleeve. You follow the same decreases that you have for the sleeve, so that your second sleeve turns out the same as your first has. So you'll continue on to work your second sleeve. So to weave in all the ends, you'll need a yarn needle. And this is a wide-eyed, or the eye of this needle is really big. So you'll get your yarn in or thread it through. And then you'll take all your ends to the wrong side if it isn't already on the wrong side. And here, when you're weaving in your ends, it's important to go back and forth into your stitches to sort of lose that end. The last thing that you want are these ends coming loose or coming undone. So I just go back and forth into my stitches until I'm satisfied with the ends being woven in, and then you can cut off on that excess. So yes, that does it for this tutorial. You can go ahead, weave in all your ends, and thank you for watching. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. I share patterns that I make for myself and my family and friends. These are, it could be beginner friendly or intermediate patterns, and it's really anything. I share just about anything that has to do with crochet. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.